names and organizations in the chat. So I'll call on you just to make this go quickly, and then we can get going. So Colin, why don't you start?
All right. Hi there. My name's Colin Pidio. I am for this year the Sandy Breslin Conservation Fellow at CLCC, but also I'm a public policy student at UConn School of Public Policy, so I'm really engaged in policy work and advocacy and all that. So really excited to be part of the program.
Thank you, Colin. He's been hugely helpful to me already. Just fantastic. Next, Litchfield Land Trust.
Hello, I'm Dean Birdsall, and I'm the Executive Director at Litchfield Land Trust. Pleasure to be here. I may end up turning my my video off also, just so I can eat my lunch. You don't have to watch that.
That's fine. Thanks, Dean. Richard Treat.
Hi, Richard Treat from the Bolton Land Trust. Glad to be here to learn a little bit more.
Thanks, Richard. Marjorie?
Hi, I'm from the Simsbury Land Trust. I'm their current president. And I'm here with Amanda.
Thank you, Marjorie. Mary? Oop, you're jumping around.
I'm Mary Magnoli. I'm from the Harwinton Land Trust.
Thanks, Mary. And Mary Terhune.
Hi, I'm Mary Terhune. I'm from the Bolton Land Trust, currently serving as the president.
Thanks, Mary. Amanda?
Hi, I'm Amanda Thompson. I am the executive director of the Simsbury Land Trust and the president of the Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy, which is comprised of East Granby, Bloomfield, West Hartford, and Windsor.
Thanks, Amanda. Barbara?
I'm Barbara Yeager with the Madison Land Conservation Trust.
Thank you, Barbara. And Billy?
Yeah, Billy Gridley, Atten Forest Land Trust. Well, it's a land trust and ecological field station.
Great. We have a newcomer, Emily, on the iPhone. Emily, if you could just introduce yourself. Hi.
Sure. I was here last time. I am representing Farmington Land Trust. I'm
Perfect.
a board member.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So we're going to launch into a short presentation, relatively short presentation today to provide you with, and this is based upon the feedback from the very first Advocates for Land Protection and Stewardship meeting. And this is, I'm going to turn it over to Colin to just give you a short overview for those of you that were not at that meeting of what we're trying to do with this program. And if you look around, you'll say, well, there's so few people here. And there's a reason for that. It's because we haven't blasted out this information. We haven't made this a big e-blast invitation for everyone in the world to attend. And I want this to be a very intimate group so that we can start to build relationships together and also build the program together so that I can really gain insights from all of you about what would be most helpful as advocates moving forward in this session. Next week, I will tell you that when we do, or the end of the month when we do an e-news, we are going to put something in there about the ALPS program. But we're doing this very deliberately and very strategically, and it doesn't change our general outreach that we do every year, which is blast out calls to action, policy updates, and all the things that we generally do for the general public, including everyone in the land trust community. But this group is intended to start small. So with that said, Colin, why don't you give everybody again, for the benefit of those who don't know what ALPS is, a very quick overview, and then I'll start the presentation.
Yeah, so basically ALPS is an initiative designed to empower our land trusts to foster strong working relationships with their state elected officials, especially to advance our shared goal of conservation and friendly policies at the state and federal level to that end. Specifically, we would love for all of you to act as our ALPS Captains, which is essentially a board member, staff person, or other representative of a land trust who is willing to engage with elected officials on various conservation policy issues. So essentially, you know, what that all boils down to is we kind of want you to be our point person that we can contact for legislative alerts, for setting up meeting with legislators, to create, you know, even to creating like local, you know, using local narratives, you know, inviting a legislator to your land trust so they can see what conservation on the ground really looks like and why it's important. that's kind of what the program's all about. We want to support you through these meetings that we have, through other training opportunities, through other organizations, lobby days, an advocacy toolkit that I think that we will go over a little bit later. So yeah, that's just kind of a kind of broad overview of the program and what we're trying to set out and how we want to support you.
Thanks, Colin. And for those of you that attended the first meeting, I promise you we won't repeat that ad nauseum, but I think it's important in the earlier days that we just remind folks, especially as we gain new people, what ALPS is intended to do. And the other thing is, we encourage more than one person from a land trust to participate. When we say a captain, we can have multiple captains. We need points of contact, but the most important thing is that we know that when we go to a land trust, we have one or more people that we can go to and say, hey, make sure that that action alert that we just sent out is disseminated as broadly as you're comfortable sending it, spreading it out there. So, okay, I'm going to dive in now. And this, again, this presentation came from a request by participants at the first meeting, when we said, okay, if we're going to meet monthly, what's the very first topic that you would like us to cover as we move forward with this program? And as we move into the session, there's going to be more in-depth updates on what's happening at the Capitol. So this is a perfect place for us to start, because right now things are just starting to develop in Hartford. So I think all of you know all about us at CLCC. So I'm going to skip this, other than to say that that photo is outdated, but we're going to get a new one. We get Colin in there. So introduction to the Connecticut General Assembly. How does it work? How do you make a difference? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Will a change in policy make a difference versus other action items? And I'm going to go into this. Is the issue urgent? Is it politically divisive? When we start a legislative session, and every year when we're developing our conservation priorities, those bottom questions are the ones that we kind of ask ourselves. Is it necessary to go to the legislature to do something, or can we achieve our goals through other means? So basically, these are some facts about the Connecticut General Assembly. There are 36 Senate districts, 101 House districts. We have 2-year election cycles. There are 26 committees. We are before a few of them most often, and that would be environment, planning and development, energy and technology, appropriations, finance, revenue, and bonding. Those are the ones that, as land conservation advocates, we are before most often. They get paid relatively low amount for this position, but they just got a raise in 23, so that's a good thing. There are some benefits, and if you have titles like chair, vice chair, deputy speaker, whatever, you get some benefits as a result of that as well. Oops, let's get rid of this on the bottom here. Yeah, that was cut off, but that's exactly what I just said. Doke. After the 24 election, this is the composition of the House and the Senate. It is predominantly the Democrats in both chambers. And I say this every time, in all sincerity, that no matter what is happening at the national level in Connecticut, land conservation, and I think this is somewhat reflected in the federal level as well, but land conservation is really a bipartisan issue. For the most part, all of our legislators, they care about land and natural resources, nature in their communities. How that plays out during the session in different bills oftentimes is not dictated by how they feel about the issue as much as some of the politics behind the legislation. By the way, if you have questions, I would say put your hand up during the presentation. This is, again, meant to be somewhat informal because we're a small group. And Colin, you can just, because I can't see everybody, if you can just let me know if somebody has a question.
Gotcha.
Happy to answer it. There's 2 lengths of legislative sessions, the long session in odd number years and the short sessions in even years. We are obviously in an odd number year in 2025. And that means that this session will primarily be about the budget. This is when they develop a new biennial budget. The years in between, there are budget adjustments, which we always weigh in on as well. And this year's session, it started on the 8th and it'll end in June. So it is a long haul, which is good in a lot of ways because it gives us an opportunity to really get into not only the budget, of course, which is very important for land conservation issues, but also legislative issues that tend to get rushed through the short session and often run out of time. And speaking of a calendar and time, this is very complicated and it's way more information that I need. And so I would think for the same for you. But again, I had referenced a few of the committees that we are mostly focused on and just looking at environment as an example. And this is information you can find on the Connecticut General Assembly website, which I will, when I get to that slide, you can have the link there. But it's a very helpful website, and it is relatively easy to maneuver and access. But in any event, the columns here, the ones that you really should be focused on, and I actually double checked this with our lobbyists this morning to make sure that nothing has changed significantly since last year, and nothing has. And column 1 is where we're at right now. Column 1 is when, in a long session, individual legislators can raise a concept bill. Today was the deadline to do that. And when we get to the section on looking at bills, you'll see that they're just concepts. There's very little to them, and then they have to be drafted. And if the committee decides to raise them, they'd have to be drafted and reviewed by council, which we'll also take a look at. So today is when individual legislators can put in their concepts. Column 2 is similarly, the committees can raise their own bills as well. And you can see for environment, they have until the middle of February to do that. Skipping over to column 4, this is the deadline. Oops, sorry about that. This is the deadline by which the committees need to, where am I? Column 4, yeah, the deadline for all the committee bills, whether proposed as individual bills or committee bills, for them to raise them. In other words, decide that they're going to take them up. Column 5 is when the deadline to have a public hearing. So that would be in March, mid-March for the Environment Committee. And then the last one would be column 8. And joint JF means joint favorable. And that is when the committee needs to decide whether or not it's gonna move on. Move on meaning to the House if it's a House bill for the first vote, or the Senate if it's a Senate bill. So this is something that we monitor. CLCC is very fortunate in that not only am I an in-house lobbyist and registered as that with the state, but we also have a contract lobbyist. And we have access to we have access to the firm, but two of the lobbyists there predominantly are those that we work with and have been for the last, at least for the almost 15 years that I have been at CLCC, we've been working with the same firm. And they really know their way around the building and are very helpful. But again, importantly, they are monitoring these deadlines and reminding me when we need to take action on things, which I would then pass on to you. So oftentimes during the session, you're going to hear from me, and it's generally an action alert saying, please contact the committee chairs and ask them to raise this bill for public hearing. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time and it could die. So if the legislation doesn't meet deadlines, it dies, with some exceptions, which I will now get to. Here's the, go ahead.
So Barbara asked in the chat, who's the firm?
We use with Capital Consultants. Mike Dugan and Liz Connolly are our lobbyists. And, they have a lot of clients. And so sometimes they might be representing a client that could create, an issue for them and for us. And so they disclose to us and we disclose to them early on and we can decide if there's an issue that's going to be problematic, we know that right up front. In other words, they're representing an organization that might have interests contrary to ours. It happens very infrequently, but if it does, we're very much aware of that. And we take care of that right at the beginning of the session. They're terrific.
Amy, what do they cost? Richard Treat.
I am not, I can't tell you that because they might not charge the same thing to every client. We've been working with them for 15 years. They have nonprofit clients and others, but certainly if you were interested in that, I would say for nonprofits, if they wanted to hire a lobbying firm, it could range from anywhere from 10,000 to 30,000.
Thank you.
Yep. And, there's services that are, there's registration requirements, there's bill tracking, there's services that some lobbyists provide and others don't. And I think that could be reflected in the proposal that you send to them, what you want, and also their response to that. So this is a development of a bill. This is just a nice slide. The bill, as I just described, the bill is proposed by the legislature, by a legislator or the committee. It gets a bill number. It may or may not get goes to public hearing. Then the bill goes to the Office of Legislative Counsel. And this is what I was saying in terms of having it reviewed. They look to see whether it's constitutional. They make sure that the language is what they want it to be. And oftentimes what gets put in doesn't look a lot like what comes out. Legislative Counsel often will change language of bills. The bill goes to the Office of Fiscal Analysis because they will decide how much it could cost. A lot of times bills they die because there's a price tag attached to it. And depending upon the year, if the administration doesn't want to, they're setting the budget. If there's a fiscal note attached to a certain legislative proposal, it could really derail that effort. And we are very conscious of that and watch for that when we are making proposals to see whether or not, if there's going to be a fiscal note, if it's something that we should be very concerned about. I'm moving you all around here so I can see. The bill is put on the calendar in the House and the Senate, as I had said before. The bill is voted on, and then if each chamber, so if it's a House bill, it goes to the House first. Then if it's approved, it's going to go to the Senate. If the Senate approves it, both houses both chambers have approved it, would go to the governor to support or to veto. And then, of course, if there's a veto, there is an override process, which I won't go into here. And then if our bill's passed, we celebrate. Otherwise, we try again. As I referenced earlier, this is the Connecticut General Assembly website. And Colin, if you could grab it and just put the link in the chat, that would be great. It's really, really, really helpful and not difficult to maneuver. And of course, if you do have issues and questions, you can contact us anytime. So these quick tips I actually pulled from a legislator's e-news. I encourage you to look up your legislators. If you don't know who they are, sign up for their alerts and their weekly updates. They're very helpful. They really do focus on what is happening in your community and sometimes share news that you might not know about. So I would absolutely sign up for the e-newsletters that your legislators, both your representative or representatives, sometimes there's more than one, and your senator have to offer. I had mentioned the Office of Legislative Research. Again, this is that service that provides that nonpartisan or unbiased review and research. Actually, I didn't reference that. I referenced the Office of Legislative Counsel. So OLR is really helpful. And oftentimes if there's an issue, we'll look to see if OLR has provided any research on it. And they often do, and it's helpful to us. And they do summarize bills in plain language. These are actually links that we will provide to you as a resource in our toolkit. I already talked about the CGA website, very helpful. If you want to follow committee meetings, like today there was a committee meeting with the Environment Committee. I wasn't able to attend, but I can go back and watch the recording of that. And similarly for public hearings, it really pretty much all these meetings that go on outside of caucus meetings, which is when the parties will go into a kind of a private discussion, but most of these, they're public. And you can follow them on CTN. And at the I see you, Barbara, I'll get to you one sec. On the CGA homepage, there is links right there to the different streams that you can, the CTN streams that you can go to. Barbara?
Just a quick question on the OLR.
Yes.
How do they stay nonpartisan?
Well, there's researchers there. So how they are, I think they're hired, not necessarily by party. I can't answer that, you know, without doing more research on how they hire, but it is intended to be just like the Council on Environmental Quality. You know, there are appointees, but these are not, they're not out of the house, they're not a Republican or a Democratic organization. This is a nonpartisan function of the legislature.
So are they managed? Who does the legislature manage them, or they just?
No, they report, so if a legislator has a question, you know, and we ask legislators all the time, like, can you figure out how much money would be generated if we put a transfer tax, blah, blah, blah. And then they go to OLR and they say, can you do that research for us? And then they'll provide a report. It's a report, it's information. It's fact-based information. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. How they are hired, I'm not really sure. It's really interesting, actually, and it's been very, very helpful. And Colin, actually, you can grab that and you can throw that in the chat too. We'll try to make it easier for you walking out of this meeting if you want to follow up. But I can find that out, Barbara. You know, every time a question's raised and I don't know the answer, I want to know the answer. So I don't know how they hire people for OLR.
Well, hire and manage, I guess, is my question, because I find these days nothing is not
right. Fair enough, for sure. So you can register to monitor any bill's journey. It's called a bill tracker, and it's a really nice tool that they offer for free to the public. So now I'm in there. So here's your email, you would set up an account, and then you would get notice on the bills that you're interested in. At CLCC, our lobbyist has a bill tracking system, and they cast a very broad net, particularly now at the beginning of the session where there's just tons of bills being raised. And we have more bills that, you know, that we could possibly track on our own. So for us, it's really helpful. We get a list it's updated constantly. I look at the bill and then I can decide whether or not this is something that we really need to be monitoring, or this is something that, you know, we don't need to worry about for purposes of CLCC's mission. So again, bill tracking is something that you can do. They give you that option here through the CGA website. And then the website itself, which again, I'll just pull it up since I have the links live. And this is a really nice kind of overview. And now we do have hybrid public hearings, which is great. You know, pre-COVID, if you wanted to testify before at a public hearing, you went to the Capitol, and sometimes, you know, signing up can be confusing, and that's one of our jobs here through the ALPS program, and just even generally, is making it as easy as possible for our advocates. I'm going to get rid of this for a sec. And I see you, Mary. I'll get to you after I just finish this thought, otherwise I'll forget. And but afterward, because during COVID, the first year, of course, the session was canceled, but then we were able to participate via Zoom. And since then, they have kept that. And what that enables people to do is to have more access to these public hearings and have more participation, because people don't have to, people work and they can't come to the Capitol and sit there all day and wait for their number to be called in order to testify. So we're really happy about this hybrid option for the benefit of all of us. Mary.
Just a quick question. I was on a legislative committee for a different organization, and we also use the bill tracker, which is a wonderful tool. Do you want us to be signing up individually for that, or does the CLCC have, you know, one sign-in that we could use where, you know, that we know exactly which bills?
No, we don't have that. We don't have that to offer, because it would become very cumbersome. We do it through our lobbyist. So I would encourage you to just go ahead in there, because, you know, it's more than just the bills, of course, that relate to land conservation. There are other elements of your community that you are issues in your community that you might be concerned about, either personally or just as a community itself, that you might want to track something. So I just think it's a really great tool for folks to take advantage of.
It is a great tool. Sometimes they can, you know, by the title of the bill, you don't always know what they're referencing or what's in the bill, and it's easy to miss something that could directly affect you. So that's why I didn't know if they were sifting through things and had specific ones that they were going to point out to us that this is what you should
No,
be.
our lobbyists do that for us. And like I said, they cast a very broad net and give me the discretion to say to them, you can take that one off. But, you know, yeah, I just think it's when we do these meetings, and we are going to have monthly ALPS meetings, that we might even have them more often. I will be bringing to your attention, you know, what bills we're seeing out there. Some of them are not necessarily ones that we would be the lead on, but they are still important to the work that we all do and care about. Yep. So I'm excited about this ALPS group because we can really start to talk about things in a little bit more detail than what we have an opportunity to do by just sending out an action alert 2 or 3 days before a public hearing, which is all the notice that we get.
Okay, thank you.
A little more. Yep. No, thanks. Great question. So this is, and I'm going to just monitor the time here. Yeah, it's already almost 12:30. So I'm going to move somewhat quickly, but not too quickly, and we can continue this conversation if we need to. But, you know, when we're lobbying, these are the C's. These are the ones that we really focus on. When we're talking to legislators, you want to make your issue, you want to be credible. You don't have to be an expert. In fact, I'll tell you what, you know, you as community members are the most important people when it comes to lobbying on an issue, because you can relate whatever it is to your community, the projects you're working on, and things that will really resonate with your legislator. Make it collaborative. Try and work with as many people and organizations as possible. That is certainly something at CLCC that we do. We work very well with many statewide partners. And of course, we have the land trusts. We have that added benefit as the land trust being our on-the-ground partners all across the state. Make it compelling. You want to, you know, focus on things that are going to resonate. Economic benefits, jobs, those are things we can always tie in to our land conservation work. And I think that's important. And make it as creative and fun. So when you're messaging, not only to your legislators, but also to your own members, you want to try and make it relatable and fun, and not this, you know, ivory tower kind of conversation that nobody can understand or relate to themselves. Can you hear that background noise?
No.
Great. Somebody, I'm working at home today and we have somebody here and it's loud. And then similarly, it's really, you know, flowing from what I just said. Make your pitch simple. Make it social as much as possible. If you can get it out there, put it on social media. Make it seductive to the media. Tell a good story. Tell a good story. And you as land trust have the opportunity to do that in spades. And make it sustainable. You know, take action, learn from it, and then do it better the next time. I work on that. I've been doing this almost 15 years. I do that every single day. You know, I've learned every step of the way on how I could do something better, how I might have said something better to a legislator and to the general public. And then here's some more tips. Again, you know, looking at your legislators are the ones that you need to be focusing on. And we will often go to, if we have an issue and we know that there are particular legislators that are extremely important for that issue, we will go to the land trust in that district. You'll get a note from us and say, please go to your legislators. They want to hear from you. And again, I'm not going to read these to you. Building bridges, we all know that that's important. We try to stay as positive as possible. And again, we have the benefit of land conservation being really a bipartisan issue. You know, everyone cares about it, and that's the message. And so, you know, it's not so much about whether or not you believe in the causes of climate change. It's about what are the impacts that we are trying to deal with here in our community, whether it's flooding, whether it's drought, whether it's invasives, whatever it is, those are the issues that we focus on. And those are the issues that we need to be relating to our legislators who can understand that and might relate to better than going right to what we believe is the cause of the problem. And one other thing I want to emphasize here is that 80% of the bills passed in the last week of the session. Honestly, sometimes it feels like the last night of the session. So that the end of the session is crazy. And some of the bills that didn't pass last year that we really cared about, it was because they ran out of time. And that is often because of political issues. Politics at the end and some horse trading going on that we're not aware of, but we just know that our bill is getting, is bearing the brunt of it. So we're hoping that some of the bills, the climate action bills in particular, are going to come up quicker this year. They're going to get raised earlier and move faster. And this is what I was saying before about with the schedule. If a bill doesn't have a public hearing or committee vote, it will likely die. However, we don't give up hope completely, because sometimes legislators will amend another bill that didn't meet the deadline, or that did meet the deadline, I should say, and take a concept that might have died for lack of action and plug it in. There is this, they call it a RAT, is when sometimes an entire bill is stricken and new language is placed in there after the opportunity for public hearing. And that's not a good thing, really, even if it works to our benefit. We would think public input is so important. And then oftentimes there's all these big bills at the end, they call them the, what do you call it? I think I have it here. I can't see it. Oh my gosh.
Implementer bills.
Yeah, it is implementer bills, but it's what do they call them? I'm having a, it's like the big tanker, and, just huge. And they will put it in there, and they're so long that it's impossible to get through them. Last year, I think it was last year, some changes that would have diluted the wetlands regulations and the SEPA, which is the Connecticut Environmental Protection Act, were kind of woven in, and it was really hard to find where that was. So we have to watch for that as well. And if it's a big bill like that, they vote on the entire thing, and they might have an opportunity to strike portions of it, but that means they have to have read it and seen it. I'm trying to remember the name of that, that we all call it. Gosh.
Is it omnibus?
Is it? Yeah. That's
Well, it is omnibus, it is implementer, but there's like a funny way of talking about it, but I'll think of it. So this is what I was getting at earlier, and some questions to consider is, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Is a change in statute necessary, et cetera, et cetera? So I used here the OSWA grant program, right? There's all these, we lobby all the time for the open space and watershed land acquisition grant program, because it is the most important funding source for the land trusts that is on the books right now in Connecticut. But sometimes we don't need to go to the legislature to improve that program. And we work through the DEEP and the administration to get some changes made, and it's procedural changes. So those are the types of things, the questions that we ask ourselves before the legislative session, which is, do we have to go through the legislative process in order to improve land conservation process and funding in Connecticut? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. In the last 2 years, we did have to go to the legislature to make some improvements in the OSWA grant program statute in order to make it more accessible to more communities. But in asking for changes to the application, you don't need to go to the legislature for that. That's where you go to DEEP. And I do chair the review board, which is the advisory council to DEEP's land acquisition management on the open space grant program, as well as the Rec and Natural Heritage Trust program. So if you have an issue with OSWA, if you have an issue with the application, if you have an issue with the process, come to me, and then we can look at it together and say, you know what, we might have to save that change for next year's legislative session. But more often than not, it's like, let's go to DEEP and talk about that. So what is lobbying, which can be a 2-hour session in and of itself, but I'm going to give you just a quick overview just to give you some things to think about, and then we can talk about if need be in between or at the next ALPS meeting. So I'm going to stop sharing this, get rid of that, and I'm going to share this, which is, no, it's not there. Where is my, oh, I know why. Hold on one second. Colin, can you pull up the lobby sheet? It'll be easier for you
Yeah.
to do it than me. Thank you.
Of
Because then
course.
I could just, let me stop sharing. And then you could pull it up and then I don't have to go back and forth.
Sounds good. I'll just share my screen.
Yes,
Okay.
you can share your screen, your co-host.
Cool.
So what Colin is looking for now, we have an advocacy toolkit as part of our CLCC website. So this is advocacy, there we go. So if you go down to, yes. So this is a standing item that has been on our website. We actually developed this in consultation with the Nature Conservancy, which was in the early days of CLCC. They were the fiscal sponsor, took that and continued to update that, what can my land trust lobby form? And then most of this information now comes from the Land Trust Alliance, and it is up to date. But here's just, if you want to think, well, what is lobbying? And it's defined as any activity intended to influence legislation. So direct lobbying, grassroots lobbying, these are two types of lobbying that the IRS identifies, and it's most important if you're going to report any lobbying time on your 990. But again, we're not going to get into too much of the details here because what you are doing is if you are contacting your legislator, you're lobbying. If you are asking your members to support a bill, you're lobbying, and that's good. So can your land trust lobby? Yes, you can. Colin, I was trying to scroll down. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is perfect. There are some rules that you need to be aware of with lobbying. The spending limits, and that is one you need to be conscious of. And unfortunately, the IRS has this very broad nonprofits, and this again goes to land trusts as part of the nonprofit community, as a 501c3. They say that spending any insubstantial part of your budget is permissible. So what does that mean? It's not, that's a tough thing to define. So there are good reasons for you to spend more than an insubstantial amount of time. And if you're nervous about that, then, how do I define that? We encourage land trusts to take the 501H election, which is something you can, and there is, I should have done this disclaimer before I started, is if you ever have a question about whether what you're doing is lobbying or not, talk to your accountant, talk to your lawyer, just ask them. You could talk to me, but I can't give you legal advice, but talk to them. And so when you are in your putting together your 990, you should have a bookkeeper or a financial advisor that's helping. Tell them that you're looking into the 501H election. This is something that you would like to do because then it will give you clear guidelines on how much you can spend on lobbying. And you would just file this form 5768. This all sounds very complicated, but it really isn't. And it's mostly not complicated because most land trusts don't spend that, they won't spend that amount. CLCC doesn't even spend 20% of our first 500,000. We don't. But we're of course registered in every way that we need to be. Here's a very important point for your land trust, particularly those of you out there that are all volunteer. The IRS doesn't regulate lobbying work done by volunteers, including board members, unless your budget is covering your expenses. So if you, as a board member, take a ride to the Capitol, and then you ask your land trust to compensate you for mileage or parking or whatever, that's okay, you can do that, but those are expenses you should track, because you want to make sure that you're not spending a substantial part of your budget on those types of expenses, which is it's hard to believe that will happen. But if you're not getting any compensation, any reimbursement whatsoever, then the IRS doesn't worry about that. Colin, you can keep going down just to ballot measure committees. So how many of you, if you just go up to number 1 there, how many of you remember question 2 a few years ago when we had the constitutional amendment to better protect public lands? Well, that was a ballot measure. And so, I'm sorry, can you go up to number 1
yeah,
there?
sorry.
Yes, that's okay. No problems. But if you're going to make a contribution,
Keep going, I can't see one.
this is
one
perfect.
is-
It's that last bullet.
Okay.
Contributions to a ballot measure committee. So in that case, CLCC, of course, we directly lobbied for question number 2, which was to pass that constitutional amendment to better protect public lands. But we also contributed money to a committee that had been set up, a ballot measure committee that had been set up to advocate for that particular ballot measure. So that's a reporting, that is something we had to report for purposes of, and also calculate and include when we were doing our own, calculation of how much we had spent. Go ahead down now, Colin, just to the next one. So state lobbying regulations that any group or individual with more than 2,000, if you spent more than $2,000, you not only, of course, would have to report all that to the IRS if it was a substantial amount, but you do have to register with the State Ethics Commission. Again, most of this is not going to happen or be relevant to your land trust, but it's really important to be aware of the rules so that you can, when in doubt, talk to your advisors and make sure that you are complying. And then local lobbying regulations, and some of you, I'm sure, have been part of this, is that when, let's say, your town puts up a referendum for an open space bond, if 2 or more individuals or groups organize, so if your land trust starts to lobby for that and you start to organize with other groups in town, technically you need to register as a PAC. If parties spend less than $1,000, you can check with the State Elections Commission to see if you can be exempt. And usually that's the case, but you should be aware of that. If it's a big issue in town and you're going to get involved with it, be aware of the lobbying regulations. Not everything you do is lobbying, and here's some examples that we put out. And again, I just encourage you to take a look at this, but these are pretty relevant examples that we see all the time, distinguishing lobbying versus not lobbying. And I'll give you a second to just take a look at those. We encourage you to get involved. This information is not meant to scare you away from it. It's meant to empower you. And know that there are rules and regulations out there. They are there for you to abide by. And if you have questions, you just ask the right person. And you could start with us. But we encourage land trusts to get involved. Except number 5, 501c3 organizations are never allowed to endorse political candidates or otherwise engage in action that could be construed as assisting or opposing a candidate for public office. And nobody is more neurotic about that than me. And when we have events over the summer, particularly if it's in an election year, I make sure that any legislators who we invite that are running for re-election, first of all, we time it so that it is not close to when they start to campaign. But if it is around the time that they're starting to campaign and we see that they're wearing a button or a t-shirt or they have a sign on their car, we ask them to zip up their sweatshirt. And I'm going by exact example from this past summer. Zip up your sweatshirt, please take off your lobbying badge, and remind the legislators that are there that they are there in their current capacity as a legislator and not as a candidate for office in the next election. Because even though the land trust has done nothing, just taking a photograph with a legislator with a vote for me button on can be construed by somebody as maybe endorsing that candidate. So we are very protective of the land trusts when it comes to that. And if I'm an event and I see that that could be possible, I go up to the legislator and I ask them, and I would encourage you to be mindful of that and do the same. And they're always mindful of it. Sometimes it just happens and it's just like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. And that's understandable. So it's that's why we share this information with you so that you are mindful of it too. Okay, Colin, you can stop. Oh, and the advocacy resources at the end of this, they're very helpful. And a lot of these come from, well, we have all the sources of where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Colin, go ahead. It's 12:45, and please interrupt with questions because again, we're a small group. There's no reason to wait till the end. And I'm going to go back to this. There's my disclaimer. There it is. I knew I had it in there. Oops, why aren't you moving? There we go. And I just went through the rules. This, by the way, is a photo from, it was pre-COVID, but many of you might know this. We organize these conservation conversations usually in the summer, but what I'd like to do is offer them all year round. And what they are intended to do is to engage with a land trust. And this is why ALPS captains are so important, because we can deal directly with you and say, hey, Mary, I think what I'd really like to do is host an event in Bolton. Because your legislators are particularly important right now to what's going on in whatever committee it is. And so let's do a site walk with them. Let's take them out there. Let's show them why this project that had been funded through the Open Space Grant Program is so important. And there's nothing like getting out in the field. This was probably the biggest group of we ever had attend one of our conservation conversations. This was in Aspetuck's Aspetuck Land Trust down in Fairfield County. The legislators in the front, this is old. Some of them have retired, but I really love this picture because it really shows you the power, and it is bipartisan. There are Democrats and Republican legislators standing there together, all advocating and excited about land conservation. So these events with ALPS, I'm hoping we can do them more consistently. And if this excites you and you want to do one soon, you know, let's look at your legislators and let's do it. So again, why lobby? I think I've already made that case. And one thing I want to share with you here, this is information that came from a think tank that monitors at the federal level, but this is very relevant to state level, that in-person lobby visits is the most effective way to influence your legislator. And that could be either in person at the Capitol, but I'm telling you, I think in person out in the field for land trusts is great. If you can get them to come out to one of your sites, invite them to one of your events, it's perfect. And then so on and so forth. When I, last week, I think it was last week, I spoke at the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters Environmental Summit. And I also sat in on a couple of the sessions, and Christine Palm, who is a former state representative from the Chester area, Lower Connecticut River area, and she's talked about, she didn't run for re-election, so she's now done. But one of the things she said, and I've heard this, is that if you're going to send a note to your legislator, particularly in response to an action alert, tailoring it, making it personal is so much more effective than pressing one of those buttons that a lot of organizations will offer, which is a fast and easy way to get a bulk amount of emails coming in. But when a legislator, and I've heard this, she reiterated this, but we hear it from legislators all the time, that when they see that form just coming in, they start to, it just doesn't mean nearly as much as if they get fewer but more personalized emails from their constituents in particular, asking them to, you know, take a position on a bill in whatever way they're proposing. So keep that in mind, that when we send out our action alerts and we say, this is where you personalize it, really try to personalize it in the way that we're asking you to, or suggesting that you do. Barbara.
So a quick question. I get a lot of these from another organization I'm involved in, and I usually do get rid of all their nonsense verbiage because I'm sure that the legislators heard it, and I put in my own stuff. But do they actually get into it far enough to see that I've customized it, or do they just assume it's one of those millions of emails they're getting?
You know, I think I can't answer that. You know, generally I just can't. All I can tell you is that you know, again, when our colleagues send out those kinds of forms, do your best to tailor it. And you might even, you know, if there's an opportunity to then follow it up with an email to your legislator and just say, hey, I just sent you this email, you know, from, you know, this is an important issue to me. I wanted to bring it, I want to underscore it and bring it to your attention. As simple as that. My name is Barbara Yeager. I'm either you are representing your land trust or you're not. You can phrase that any way you want, depending upon what it is. I am in your district. I just sent you this email on this issue. I want to emphasize how important it is to me that you vote a certain way. Simple as that.
Thank you.
I wouldn't not take advantage of those opportunities, but I would personalize it as much as you can, either through it or as a follow-up. Mary.
Thank you. I've heard from other people, and it's funny on that list how phone calls were pretty low on that list, because I've heard from other organizations and legislators that sometimes phone calls, you think, oh my God, they must have got like 50 phone calls. No, they got 8 phone calls, and that was enough of a push.
That's right.
They don't necessarily get a lot of feedback on things, and sometimes just something simple from a few people really does make a difference.
Totally. And that's what, and that, it's not to say you shouldn't do the ones at the bottom. That was just what's the most effective versus what's the least effective. But to your point exactly, what did Christine say? Christine Palm said at the meeting last week that as few as 7 contact points from a constituent is enough to get the attention. And oftentimes that is, rooted through their aid, but that's enough. So this is why your jobs as ALPS captains is so important, because then what you can do is you can send out the action alert. You can ask your members to follow through on it as well. So that in and of itself is huge. But then you can take that extra step and just say what I just said to Barbara. Like, hey, we just sent in testimony. I just want to emphasize how important that is. If they get 7 of those, that could be enough to tip the scales and move it forward. So yeah, you're totally right. Okay, let's see where I'm at with this. Oops, where am I? This is really important right up here. And this is what I was saying to you, Barbara. It doesn't have to be long, especially when you're doing a follow-up message. Just make sure you identify yourself as a constituent and any organizational affiliation if you have your land trust hat on. Local experiences, these are the things that we try to embed in our action alerts, this type of advice, and say, okay, this is your spot right here in this testimony to tell your story, right there. And thank them. We always thank them. If a bill moves forward, go back and thank your legislator. And one of the things that we can help you with in ALPS especially is going through, if a bill has been voted on, who voted yes, who voted no. You can find that. You can always find that on the Connecticut General Assembly website. When we get into bills and as we move along with these monthly meetings, we will continue to show you that and ask you to take action if it's relevant. And then finally, we have that toolkit that Colin had pulled up. It's on our website. There's there are a couple of documents up there right now that Colin is working to update. One of them is just the overview of the Connecticut General Assembly. It's information that you can find anyway, but we like to have it handy on the website. So he's updating that, as well as a primer on land conservation. And the primer on land conservation, Colin, why don't you pull that one up just so I can show folks, because it is intended to be a really nice handout if you just want to make the case for or make land conservation issues more relatable to your legislator in terms of the statutes that are relevant and the stats that they often ask for. We have this primer, and we actually have it in Spanish as well, but that will need to be updated as well. So we do this, we try to do this updated every year, because oftentimes, we talk about the 21% goal, and then a legislator will say, well, how much, what are we talking about there? So we try to keep this nice and fresh so that you can use it. Colin, yeah, if you could just scroll down. Because CLCC advocates so fiercely for OSWA, it's there. Recon Natural Heritage Trust Program, it's there. And that gives you some extra information if you were asked by a legislator about the Community Investment Act and things that, again, are always on our agenda. And again, these numbers will be updated.
Oh, these numbers actually are updated.
Oh, this is the new one. Good for
This is the new
you.
one, yeah.
Thank you, Colin. Great job. We just need to get this on the website. Thank you. So you can scroll down. Again, there you go. And so there are statutes and terms. That's another thing when we talk about conservation easements, and we want to make sure that everybody understands what that means. And so legislators in particular might be very detached from some of the terminology that we as land trusts and land conservation professionals use, every day. So we have this there as a guide to help the legislators as well as the general public in understanding some of the things that we're talking about. Thank you, Colin. Great work. Thanks for getting that done, and we'll get that up on the website. So that leaves us with a whole 4 minutes of any other questions that you might have. or any other information, but yeah, that's our ALPS meeting for the month. And it is recorded, so we probably will share that with those that ask for it. We'll put that up on our ALPS webpage, and yeah, and keep you posted. But are there any other questions?
Do you have does the conservation groups have a day at the legislative building?
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. So we haven't had a lobby day in several years. And we have to decide, do we want a land conservation lobby day, or do we want something like the Community Investment Act lobby day? And so because CIA is a coalition of sectors, land use sectors, and this is a budget year where we're concerned about the CIA and we're asking for an increase in the fee to support it, we're going to have a CIA lobby day this year. And we are going to ask all the land trusts to come down and be ready to showcase their projects that have been funded through the CIA and, you know, through the Open Space Grant Program and the Urban Green and Community Garden Program. So the answer is yes, we have had lobby days. Yes, we will have one, but it will not just be exclusively focused on land conservation, except through our sector, which will do its job in advocating for the funding for our sector.
Okay.
I'm excited about it. In fact, this morning I just emailed our lobbyists to say, you know, now the session started. We are waiting for there'll be at least one bill raised that will propose an increase in the fee for the Community Investment Act. So once we have a bill number, we can start to publicize that. And I said, let's get that lobby day scheduled. At our conference on March 22nd, we always host the Connecticut General Assembly panel so that legislators can come and provide updates. I'm not going to tell you to only go to that one during that session because there's going to be 50 workshops that you're going to choose from that day. So, but it would be nice if one person from your land trust could go there and then report back. That's a great session. And we usually get at least 4 or 5 legislators that participate. And it's in March, so that's mid-session, which is a good time. And we'll do a call to action then too. So I have to tell you, I was a little weary. You could stop the recording. Colin, please. But I was a little weary before this meeting, but I feel